The first ship appeared on a Tuesday morning, silent as a shadow against the pale sky. It wasn't like the movies, no dramatic entrance, no booming sounds or flashing lights. Just a smooth, dark shape that seemed to absorb sunlight rather than reflect it. Dr. Sarah Chen was drinking her third cup of coffee in the NASA Observation Center when the alerts started screaming. Within minutes, every telescope, radar station, and satellite on Earth was pointed at the same spot in the sky. The ship was massive, easily the size of Manhattan, and it was descending slowly toward the Nevada desert. By evening, 17 more ships had arrived. They landed in remote areas across the globe: Siberian tundra, Australian outback, the Sahara Desert, deep Amazon rainforests. Each ship touched down with barely a whisper, settling into the earth as if they'd always belonged there. The world held its breath, waiting for doors to open, for aliens to emerge, for first contact to begin. But nothing happened. The ships just sat there, dark and silent, like giant seeds planted in Earth's soil. What nobody knew yet was that these weren't visitors passing through. They were colonists. And once they set foot on Earth, they would never leave again. Sarah was part of the first scientific team to reach the Nevada landing site. The ship, if you could call it that, looked nothing like humanity's crude rockets and shuttles. It was organic in shape, like a massive black pearl that had been stretched and twisted. The surface wasn't metal but something that looked alive, with a texture like smooth bark. When she placed her hand against it, she could swear she felt a pulse. Temperature readings are all over the place, reported Dr. Marcus Webb, the team's physicist. It's warm to the touch, but our infrared shows cold spots that shift and move. Like blood flowing through veins, Sarah murmured, not taking her eyes off the ship's hull. The military had already established a perimeter 2 miles out. General Harrison, a stern man with gray eyes and grayer hair, made it clear that this was as close as the scientists would get until they knew more. Sarah understood the caution, but her curiosity burned like acid in her stomach. After 30 years of searching the cosmos for signs of life, it had come to them. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications tent. "We're getting similar reports from all 18 sites. No movement, no signals, no response to any attempts at communication." Sarah nodded, but something bothered her about that number. 18? I thought there were 17 ships. No, ma'am. Satellite imagery confirmed 18 as of 0600 hours. The 18th one landed in Greenland about 4 hours ago. A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the desert evening air. The ships were still coming, but so quietly that even their advanced monitoring systems barely noticed. How many more were out there? The world had changed in a week. Stock markets crashed and recovered daily. Religious leaders proclaimed everything from the second coming to the end times. Conspiracy theorists had a field day, while governments tried to maintain calm and control. But for Sarah and her team, life had settled into a routine of careful observation and endless speculation. That's when the first door opened. It happened simultaneously across all sites at exactly 12 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. Not dramatic sliding doors or ramps lowering, the ship simply developed openings, as if the hull material had become liquid and parted like curtains. "My God," whispered Dr. Webb, staring at the monitor feeds from around the world. "They're coordinated." Every single ship opened at the same moment. But what emerged wasn't what anyone expected. The beings that stepped out were tall, nearly 7 feet, but their most striking feature wasn't their height. It was how perfectly they seemed designed for Earth. They breathed the air without equipment. They moved with ease in Earth's gravity. Their skin, pale green with a slight luminescence, seemed to absorb and reflect sunlight in a way that made them appear to glow softly. "They look almost..." Sarah struggled for words. "Human," finished Dr. Webb. "I mean, if humans had evolved on a different world with slightly different conditions." The beings, Sarah decided to call them Verdans because of their green-tinted skin, didn't seem aggressive. They emerged in small groups and immediately began what could only be described as surveying activities. They collected soil samples, tested water sources, and seemed to catalog local plant and animal life. But they ignored every attempt at communication. They're not leaving, Sarah reported to the emergency session of world leaders via secure video link. Every indication suggests they're settling in for the long haul. President Martinez leaned forward on the screen. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what are their intentions? Sarah had been dreading this question. Mr. President, based on their behavior patterns, I believe we're witnessing the beginning of a colonization effort. They're not explorers or diplomats. They're settlers. The room erupted in multiple languages as world leaders began talking over each other. General Harrison's voice cut through the noise. Dr. Chen, explain your reasoning. They're testing soil composition and pH levels. They're cataloging local ecosystems. They're establishing what appear to be permanent structures near each ship. And most tellingly, more ships continue to arrive. We're up to 37 now. 37? The German chancellor looked shocked. The report said. The reports are always behind, Sarah interrupted. They arrive at night, during storms, or in remote areas where detection is difficult. Each ship lands, and within 24 hours, the beings emerge and begin their survey work. What about communication? Asked the Japanese Prime Minister. Have they responded to any overtures? Sarah shook her head. They acknowledge our presence but show no interest in communication. It's like... She paused, searching for the right analogy. It's like how we might notice ants while we're doing yard work. We see them, we might even step around them, but we don't try to have a conversation. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. The first conflict was inevitable. It happened at the Australian site, where local Aboriginal communities had been displaced by the military cordon. A group of protesters tried to approach the ship, believing the beings were connected to their ancestral spirits. The Verdans, who had been peacefully collecting samples, simply stopped them. Not violently. They didn't use weapons or force. They just raised their hands, and the humans found themselves unable to move forward. An invisible barrier seemed to push them back gently but firmly. It's some kind of energy field, Dr. Webb analyzed from the video footage. Watch their hands, see that slight shimmer in the air? They're manipulating electromagnetic fields, maybe even gravity itself. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Beings with that level of technology could wipe out humanity without breaking a sweat. But they hadn't. They'd simply prevented unwanted contact. They don't want to hurt us, she realized out loud. But they also don't want us interfering with their work. Their work of colonizing our planet, General Harrison said grimly. Sarah woke to alarms blaring throughout the research compound. She threw on clothes and ran to the observation center, where chaos reigned. What's happening? She demanded. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his station, face pale. Ma'am, the ships, they're changing. On the monitors, feeds from around the world showed the same thing. The smooth, organic surfaces of the verdant ships were transforming. Structures were growing from them, tall spires, broad platforms, complex geometric shapes that defied easy description. It's like they're blooming, Dr. Webb said in amazement. The ships aren't ships at all. They're seeds. Sarah stared at the screens, understanding flooding through her. They're not just colonists. They're terraformers. They're going to change Earth itself. As if responding to her words, the transformed structures began to emit a soft, pulsing light. The very air around each site started to shimmer with the same energy they'd seen the Verdans use to create barriers. Atmospheric readings are shifting, reported the environmental specialist. Oxygen levels are fluctuating, and we're detecting trace gases that weren't there before. They're making the air more suitable for themselves, Sarah whispered. The magnitude of what was happening hit her like a physical blow. And less suitable for us. The changes were accelerating. Vegetation within a mile of each verdant site had begun to alter. Earth plants were growing larger, changing color, developing new characteristics. Animals in these zones exhibited strange behaviors. They seemed calmer, more organized, almost intelligent. But humans in these areas began experiencing problems. Respiratory issues, headaches, disorientation. The military had to evacuate everyone from the inner zones. They're creating habitable spaces, Sarah explained to yet another emergency meeting. Not just for themselves, but they're upgrading the local ecosystem. The problem is, the upgrades aren't compatible with human biology. How long before these zones expand beyond the affected areas? Asked President Martinez. Sarah had been dreading this calculation. Based on current rates of expansion, 18 months. Maybe 2 years before the entire planet is transformed. And humans would need artificial life support to survive in the new atmosphere. The question everyone was thinking hung unspoken in the air. What were humanity's options? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Webb had been analyzing Verdant technology, trying to understand how their energy manipulation worked. He'd made a breakthrough, but it wasn't the kind that would help humanity fight back. Sarah, you need to see this, he said, his voice strange and distant. She found him in the lab, staring at a complex holographic display that definitely hadn't been there that morning. Marcus, where did this equipment come from? I built it, he said simply. Or rather, I was shown how to build it. Sarah, they've been teaching me. Ice formed in her stomach. What do you mean, teaching you? The energy fields they emit. They're not just environmental control. They're a form of communication. Once you learn to tune into the frequency, you can understand them. His eyes were bright, almost fevered. Sarah, they're not invaders. They're gardeners. Gardeners? They travel from world to world, improving ecosystems, upgrading life forms, making everything better. Earth isn't their first stop, and it won't be their last. They've done this thousands of times. Sarah backed toward the door. Something was wrong with Marcus. His voice, his mannerisms, even the way he stood was different. What happens to the original inhabitants of these worlds? She asked carefully. Those who adapt survive. Those who can't. He shrugged, as if it didn't matter. Evolution, Sarah. Natural selection on a cosmic scale. She ran. Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Dr. Webb wasn't the only one affected. Humans living near the verdant sites for extended periods were changing. Not physically, at least not yet, but mentally. They became calmer, more focused, and utterly convinced that the verdant transformation of Earth was not only inevitable but desirable. It's a form of mental conditioning, she reported to General Harrison. The energy fields don't just change the environment. They change anyone exposed to them long enough. How long is long enough? Based on Dr. Webb's case, about 30 days of continuous exposure. Harrison's face was grim. Dr. Chen, I need you to know that some world leaders are considering military action. Sarah felt a chill. General, our weapons would be like throwing rocks at a battleship. Worse, we don't even know what their defensive capabilities are. I agree. But fear makes people do stupid things. And people are very afraid right now. As if to prove his point, reports came in that afternoon of a failed missile strike on the Siberian site. The missiles had simply stopped. Mid-flight, they'd frozen in the air, then gently lowered to the ground without detonating. The Verdant's response was swift and unmistakable. Within hours, the transformation zones around all sites doubled in size. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She was going to make contact. Not official contact, the governments of the world would never approve. But someone had to try to communicate with the Verdants on their own terms. Someone had to find out if there was any possibility of coexistence. She approached the Nevada site alone, walking past the military checkpoints in the early morning darkness. By the time anyone realized she was missing, she'd be inside the transformation zone. The change was immediate and overwhelming. The air itself felt different, thicker, more alive. Colors seemed more vivid. Sounds were clearer and more musical. She could feel the energy field the Verdants used, like a warm current flowing through her body. And she could hear them. Not voices, exactly, but thoughts. Concepts flowing directly into her mind. They were aware of her presence, had been aware of her since she'd entered their domain. Welcome, little gardener. The thought wasn't hostile, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. It carried the same tone someone might use when addressing a curious child who'd wandered into their workspace. Sarah tried to project her own thoughts back. Why are you here? What do you want from Earth? Want? The concept seemed to puzzle them. We want nothing. We improve. We upgrade. We make better. Better for who? Better for life. Better for growth. Better for the future. Images flooded her mind. Worlds they'd visited before, dead planets brought to life, barren rocks transformed into gardens, primitive ecosystems evolved into complex paradises. But in every image, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Where are the original inhabitants? The people who lived on these worlds before you arrived? The answer came not in words but in a feeling. Sadness, perhaps, but also inevitability. Some had adapted. Most had not. Evolution was a harsh teacher, but a necessary one. You're killing us, Sarah projected with all the force she could muster. No. We are offering you the chance to become something greater. Sarah returned from her contact with the Verdans changed, but not in the way Dr. Webb had been. She'd been exposed to their thoughts, their perspective, but something in her had resisted the conditioning. Perhaps it was her scientific training, her habit of questioning everything, or simply stubborn human nature. She now understood what humanity was facing, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. They're not evil, she reported to the emergency council. They genuinely believe they're helping. But their help will end human civilization as we know it. Explain, demanded President Martinez. They've done this before, on hundreds of worlds. They transform the ecosystem to support more advanced life forms. Species that can adapt to the new conditions survive and evolve. Those that can't become extinct. And humanity? In their view, we have two choices. Evolve or die. General Harrison leaned forward. What does evolution mean to them? Sarah took a deep breath. Complete integration with their collective consciousness. Humans who accept the transformation become part of their network. They retain some individuality, but their primary loyalty becomes the collective good as the Verdans define it. And those who refuse? The atmosphere will become unbreathable for unmodified humans within 2 years. Those who can't or won't adapt will suffocate. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the sound of people trying to process the end of the world. The first human colonies appeared. Groups of people who'd been exposed to the verdant fields began gathering at the edges of the transformation zones. They didn't enter the zones completely, not yet, but they built settlements where they could benefit from some of the atmospheric changes while still maintaining basic human biology. These hybrid communities were eerily peaceful. Crime disappeared. Conflict seemed to evaporate. People worked together with perfect efficiency. But when reporters tried to interview them, the responses were always the same, vague, pleasant, and somehow empty. They're losing their humanity, Sarah told her remaining team. Many of the scientists had either been reassigned or had voluntarily joined the hybrid communities. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Dr. Webb had become a regular spokesman for the hybrid communities. When Sarah saw him on the news, she barely recognized the passionate, argumentative colleague she'd worked with for years. This version of Marcus was calm, centered, and absolutely convinced that humanity's future lay in accepting the verdant gift. The old ways were inefficient, he said in an interview. Conflict, competition, struggle, these things hold back progress. The verdants offer us something better. Unity. Purpose. Evolution. Sarah threw her coffee mug at the television. The resistance began forming. Not an official military resistance, most governments were still trying to negotiate or accommodate the verdants. But groups of scientists, philosophers, artists, and ordinary people who refused to accept that humanity had to choose between transformation or extinction. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial leader, mostly because she was one of the few people who'd had direct contact with the verdants and retained her independence of thought. We need to find a third option, she told the gathered group in an abandoned warehouse outside Denver. The Verdants see this as an either-or situation, but there has to be another way. What if there isn't? Asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, a biologist from Mexico. What if we really do have to choose between evolution and extinction? Then we choose extinction, said Father Michael O'Brien, a Jesuit priest who'd become one of the Resistance's moral voices. Better to die as humans than live as something else. Speak for yourself, Father, snapped Jennifer Liu, a 25-year-old programmer. I'm not ready to give up on humanity just because the aliens think we're obsolete. Sarah held up her hands for quiet. We're not giving up. We're going to find a way to coexist without losing ourselves. But privately, she wondered if such a thing was possible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the children. Dr. Keiko Tanaka, a child psychologist who joined the resistance, made the observation that would change everything. Children exposed to low levels of the verdant energy fields aren't being conditioned the same way adults are, she reported during a clandestine meeting. They're adapting, but they're keeping their personalities, their creativity, their human spark. Sarah leaned forward. What do you mean? I've been studying kids in the buffer zones, areas where the verdant influence is present but weak. They're developing new abilities. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved intuition, better problem-solving skills. But they're still completely human in their emotional responses and individual thinking. You're saying the children are naturally finding the middle ground we've been looking for? Exactly. The verdant energy affects developing brains differently than mature ones. Children can adapt without losing themselves. Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. How long do we have before these children grow up? That's the thing, Dr. Tanaka said, excitement growing in her voice. The adaptation seems to be permanent. Children who've been exposed and then removed from the zones retain the abilities but stay fully human. We need to study this more, Sarah said. But quietly. If the Verdants realize we're finding a way to adapt without joining their collective. She didn't need to finish the thought. The Verdants notice. Sarah was in the field, studying a group of adapted children in a small town near the Colorado site, when the energy field around her suddenly intensified. The familiar presence filled her mind, but this time it carried a different tone. Curious little gardener. You seek to cheat the choice. We seek to survive as ourselves, Sarah projected back. Impossible. Evolution requires change. Change requires sacrifice. Not for the children. They're proving you wrong. There was a pause, and Sarah could feel something like surprise from the collective consciousness. Show us. What followed was the strangest scientific presentation of Sarah's career. Standing in a field outside Pueblo, Colorado, she found herself demonstrating human adaptability to an alien intelligence that could reshape worlds. The children, 5 of them, ages 7 to 12, showed off their enhanced abilities. Tommy, age 9, could predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy. Lisa, 7, could communicate with local animals that had been modified by the verdant influence. 12-year-old Marcus, named after Dr. Webb, ironically, could manipulate small electromagnetic fields, similar to the verdants but on a human scale. Interesting, came the alien thought. But insufficient. These adaptations are minor. They do not address the fundamental incompatibility. What incompatibility? Sarah demanded. Images flooded her mind. The verdant perspective of Earth showed a planet choking on pollution, struggling with overpopulation, torn by conflict and competition. In their view, these were not political or social problems but biological ones. Humanity was a species that had outgrown its ability to maintain sustainable balance. We offer efficiency, unity, survival through cooperation. And we offer diversity, innovation, survival through adaptation. Your way leads to extinction. Your way leads to the death of everything that makes us human. The mental conversation was interrupted by young Lisa tugging on Sarah's sleeve. Dr. Chen, the girl whispered, they're scared. What? The aliens. They're scared. Not of us, but of failing. Sarah looked down at the child, then projected the thought toward the Verdans. Is that true? Are you afraid of failing? The response came loaded with complex emotions. The Verdans had improved thousands of worlds, but they'd also witnessed the extinction of countless species that couldn't adapt. Each failure weighed on their collective consciousness. They'd become convinced that their way was the only way because the alternative, watching species destroy themselves, was too painful. We will not watch your species die through stubbornness. And we won't let our species die through assimilation. The standoff was complete. The war almost began by accident. A military unit, acting without authorization, attempted to breach the perimeter of the Australian site. The Verdans' response was swift and decisive. Instead of their usual gentle barriers, they unleashed something that could only be described as a gravity storm. Vehicles were crushed, equipment was destroyed, and 12 soldiers died. But it was the Verdans' follow-up action that truly terrified world leaders. Within 6 hours of the incident, transformation zones around all sites expanded by 50%. The timeline for global atmospheric change shortened from 2 years to 18 months. Sarah found herself in an emergency meeting with world leaders who were now seriously considering nuclear weapons as a last resort. You can't, she pleaded via video link. Apart from the fact that our weapons probably can't penetrate their defenses, any attack will only accelerate their transformation of the planet. Then what do you suggest, Dr. Chen? President Martinez's voice was strained. We can't negotiate with them, we can't fight them, and we can't stop them. What options does that leave? Sarah took a deep breath. We prove them wrong. The demonstration was humanity's last, desperate gambit. Sarah had spent a week gathering adapted children from around the world, along with scientists, artists, philosophers, and representatives from every major culture on Earth. They assembled in the neutral zone outside the Nevada site, where the Verdan influence was strong enough for communication but not overwhelming. This is insane, muttered General Harrison, who'd reluctantly agreed to provide security for the event. Probably, Sarah admitted. But it's the only chance we have. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution. They were going to show the Verdans what humanity could become without losing its essential nature. Not through argument or negotiation, but through demonstration. The adapted children were the key. They could interface with Verdan technology and energy fields while maintaining their human creativity and individuality. Working together, they began to construct something that had never been attempted before, a hybrid technology that combined Verdan efficiency with human innovation. What they built defied easy description. It was part machine, part living organism, part work of art. It processed atmospheric gases, cleaned pollution, and generated clean energy, but it did so in ways that enhanced rather than replaced natural ecosystems. It's beautiful, whispered Dr. Vasquez, watching as the hybrid creation began to grow and spread, turning a patch of desert into a small oasis that somehow looked both completely natural and obviously technological. But the real magic happened when the device began to sing. The Verdan energy fields created harmonious frequencies, but they were mathematically perfect, precise, and predictable. The human-Verdan hybrid technology created music that was mathematical but also emotional, precise but also spontaneous. It was the sound of two different types of intelligence learning to work together. The Verdan collective consciousness fell silent. The response came at dawn. Sarah woke to find a single Verdan standing outside her tent. Not the collective presence she'd grown accustomed to, but an individual, something she hadn't known was possible. You have surprised us, it said, the thought carrying a distinctly personal tone. Who are you? Sarah asked aloud, then repeated the question mentally. I was, the concept of individual identity is difficult to translate. I am the part of us that remembers what it was like to be singular. To be alone. Your species wasn't always collective? No. We chose unity because individuality led to conflict. Conflict led to waste. Waste led to extinction for many worlds we might have saved. But your demonstration suggests another possibility. Sarah felt her heart racing. What possibility? cooperation without assimilation, unity without uniformity. We had not considered this because we had not seen it successfully demonstrated. The children found the balance naturally, Sarah said. They adapted to your influence without losing themselves. They prove coexistence is possible. Perhaps. But the challenge remains. Your species faces extinction through your own actions. Climate change, resource depletion, conflict. These problems require solutions. Then help us solve them without changing what we are. The verdant individual, Sarah found herself thinking of it as Harold, seemed to consider this. It would require trust. Your species would need to accept guidance without surrendering autonomy. Our collective would need to accept imperfection in the interest of diversity. Both are difficult. But possible? We will attempt a new approach. A partnership rather than an upgrade. But if your species continues on its current path of self-destruction, the offer will be withdrawn. How long do we have? 1 generation. 30 of your years. If humanity can demonstrate sustainable progress in that time, we will establish permanent cooperative colonies. If not... The thought trailed off, but Sarah understood. 30 years to prove that humanity could evolve without losing its soul. The announcement changed everything. When world leaders revealed the agreement publicly, the response was explosive. Some hailed it as humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement. Others condemned it as surrender to alien overlords. Religious groups were split between those who saw divine providence and those who feared demonic deception. But the most important response came from the adapted children. We can do this, 10-year-old Lisa said during a global broadcast that reached 2 billion people. We just have to remember to stay human while we're getting better. The simplicity of her statement resonated around the world. #StayHuman became a global movement, representing not resistance to change but the determination to grow without losing essential humanity. The hybrid colonies began as experimental communities where humans could benefit from verdant environmental improvements while maintaining their cultural and individual identities. The technology developed by the adapted children became the foundation for a new type of civilization, one that was sustainable, efficient, and harmonious but still recognizably human. It wasn't easy. There were failures, conflicts, and setbacks. Some humans couldn't adapt to the new reality and retreated to unmodified zones. Some became too enamored with verdant efficiency and lost their human spark. But slowly, carefully, a new balance emerged. Dr. Sarah Chen, now director at Human Verdant Cooperative Studies, stood on the observation deck of New Geneva, one of the most successful hybrid colonies. The city below was a marvel of integrated technology and natural beauty. Buildings grew from living materials that cleaned the air and generated energy. Transportation systems moved like schools of fish, efficient but organic. Gardens and parks weren't separate from urban areas but woven throughout them. But it was still recognizably human. Children played in those parks, their laughter echoing off bioarchitectural surfaces. Artists created sculptures from living materials that responded to emotion and music. Scientists pursued research driven by curiosity rather than just efficiency. Penny for your thoughts? Sarah turned to find Harold, the individual verdant who'd become her primary contact over the years, approaching in its preferred humanoid form. The verdants had learned to create temporary individual bodies for interaction with humans, though they remained connected to their collective consciousness. Just thinking about how far we've come, Sarah said. 10 years ago, I thought we were facing extinction. Now you're proving that evolution doesn't require the death of what came before, Harold finished. Your species continues to surprise us. Good surprises, I hope. The best kind. We have learned much from observing human adaptability. Other worlds we visit in the future will benefit from these lessons. Sarah felt a chill. You're leaving? Not leaving. Expanding. The success here has convinced the collective that the cooperative model can work elsewhere. We will maintain our presence on Earth, but some of us will carry the new approach to other worlds. Other worlds with intelligent species? Yes. Species that, until now, we would have offered only the choice between transformation or extinction. Now we can offer a third option. Sarah smiled, understanding the true scope of what they'd accomplished. Humanity hadn't just saved itself, it had fundamentally changed how an advanced alien civilization approached other species. The cooperative model they developed would spread across the galaxy, offering a new path for cosmic evolution. The final evaluation was held in orbit above Earth, aboard a hybrid space station that represented the pinnacle of human-verdant cooperation. Representatives from both species, along with adapted humans who could interface with both cultures, gathered to assess 3 decades of partnership. Sarah, now in her 70s but kept healthy by medical advances that blended human and verdant knowledge, presented humanity's case. "We said we could evolve without losing our souls," she told the assembled council. "I believe we've proven that." The evidence was overwhelming. Earth's climate had stabilized through technology that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Population growth had balanced through prosperity and education rather than catastrophe. Conflicts still existed, but they were resolved through institutions that combined human creativity with verdant analytical capabilities. Most importantly, humans remained recognizably human. They still fell in love, created art, told jokes, and dreamed of impossible things. But they did so in a world that was sustainable, equitable, and ready to take its place in a larger galactic community. The verdant collective consciousness spoke through Harold. "The experiment has succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. Humanity has demonstrated that conscious evolution is possible. The partnership will continue indefinitely." But it was the next announcement that truly stunned the assembly. Furthermore, based on the success of the cooperative model, the collective has decided to offer similar partnerships to 17 other worlds currently under consideration for traditional intervention. The techniques developed here will prevent the extinction of species we previously considered beyond help. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. 30 years of struggle, compromise, and careful balance had not only saved humanity but would save countless other species across the galaxy. Sarah's great-granddaughter, Elena, was one of the new generation of hybrid humans, those born into the cooperative world who could interface naturally with both human creativity and verdant efficiency. At 15, she was already working on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone. "Tell me the story again, Great-Grandma," Elena said as they sat in Sarah's garden, where earth flowers grew alongside luminescent verdant plants in perfect harmony. "Which story?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. "About the day they landed. About how you almost lost everything." Sarah smiled, looking up at the sky where both human spacecraft and verdant bioships traveled between Earth and the growing network of cooperative colonies among the stars. "They set foot on Earth," she began, "and we thought they would take over our world." "But they didn't," Elena prompted. "No, they didn't. Instead, they taught us that there's always a third option, if you're brave enough to look for it." "No, they didn't. Instead, they taught us that there's always a third option, if you're brave enough to look for it," Sarah continued, watching Elena's eyes light up with the familiar wonder that still made her heart soar after all these years. Elena leaned forward, her hybrid-enhanced intuition picking up on the deeper currents of the story. "But it wasn't just about finding the option, was it? It was about proving we deserved it." Sarah nodded, impressed as always by her great-granddaughter's insight. At 15, Elena could process information with verdant-like efficiency while maintaining the emotional depth and creative leaps that were purely human. She represented everything they'd fought to preserve and enhance. "That's exactly right. The Verdants didn't just offer us cooperation, they challenged us to earn it. Every day for 30 years, we had to prove that humans could grow without losing what made us special. And now—" Sarah gestured toward the sky, where the evening star was actually New Harmony Station, a joint human-verdant research facility studying potentially habitable worlds. "Now we're helping other species find their own third options." But Elena's expression grew thoughtful, the way it did when she was processing something complex through both her human intuition and her enhanced analytical capabilities. "Great-Grandma, what happens when we meet a species that can't find a third option? What if we encounter beings who really do have to choose between transformation and extinction?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. In all the celebration of humanity's success, she tried not to think about the species that hadn't made it, the civilizations the Verdans had encountered before developing the cooperative model. But Elena's generation would have to face that legacy. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But I think that's why your generation exists. You and the other hybrid children aren't just humanity's future, you're the bridge to understanding what we couldn't understand before. Elena was quiet for a moment, her enhanced perception allowing her to sense the gravitational fluctuations that announced an incoming Verdan bioship. Harold is coming, she said simply. Sarah wasn't surprised. Harold had developed an uncanny ability to appear whenever important conversations were taking place. The individual Verdan consciousness had evolved over the decades, becoming more distinct from the collective while maintaining its connection to the greater whole. Harold materialized at the garden's edge, choosing a form that was more human-like than usual, something it did when sensing strong emotions from its human companions. I apologize for the intrusion, Harold said, though both Sarah and Elena knew it had been monitoring their conversation through the ambient energy fields. But Elena's questions touch on matters the collective has been considering. Elena turned to face Harold directly, her hybrid awareness allowing her to perceive the Verdan's true form beneath its chosen appearance. You're worried about something. Not worried. Anticipating. We have made contact with 3 new civilizations in the past year. 2 had shown promise for the cooperative model. The 3rd. Harold paused, and Sarah could feel the weight of collective sadness flowing through the energy fields around them. The 3rd is facing extinction through their own actions, but their biological psychology makes cooperation nearly impossible. They are driven by competitive hierarchies so fundamental to their nature that even our influence cannot modify them without destroying their essential identity. Sarah felt the old familiar chill. So they face the original choice. Transform or die. Yes. Unless. Harold looked directly at Elena. Unless a new approach can be developed. One that doesn't require our intervention or human mediation, but emerges from principles we haven't yet discovered. Elena stood, her 15-year-old frame somehow carrying an authority that reminded Sarah of her own younger self facing impossible challenges. You want me to help. We want your generation to help. The hybrid minds that can think in ways neither pure human nor pure Verdan consciousness can achieve. Sarah started to object. Elena was still a child, despite her enhanced capabilities, but her great-granddaughter held up a hand with surprising firmness. Great-grandma, you spent 30 years proving that humans could evolve without losing their souls. Maybe it's time for the next generation to prove that evolution itself can evolve. Over the following months, Elena joined a select group of hybrid humans working with the Verdan Collective on what they called the Third Option Project. Their mission was audacious: develop universal principles of cooperation that could work for any species, regardless of their biology or psychology. Sarah watched with pride and terror as Elena threw herself into the work. The project required the hybrid humans to interface more deeply with Verdan consciousness than ever before, while simultaneously pushing their human creativity to its absolute limits. They're trying to understand cooperation at a quantum level, Elena explained during one of their evening walks. Not just social cooperation, but the way matter and energy cooperate to create life, the way information cooperates with consciousness to create thought. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Sarah replied, though she recognized the irony of her concern. She'd spent decades taking risks that seemed impossible at the time. It is. But so was what you did. The difference is, we have 30 years of successful human-Verdan cooperation to build on. We're not starting from scratch. The breakthrough came 6 months later, announced not through official channels but through a phenomenon that spread across all hybrid colonies simultaneously. The hybrid humans working on the project had discovered something that could only be described as a new form of consciousness, one that existed in the spaces between species, in the quantum interactions that made cooperation possible at the most fundamental level. They called it the Nexus, and it changed everything. The Nexus wasn't a collective consciousness like the Verdans, nor was it individual awareness like humans. It was something entirely new, a form of awareness that existed in relationships, in the connections between minds rather than within them. It's not about what you are, Elena tried to explain to Sarah. It's about how you connect to what you're not. Any species can access it, regardless of their biology, because the nexus exists in the space between differences, not despite them. The first test came with the aggressive hierarchical species the Verdants had been unable to help. Using nexus principles, Elena's team made contact not with individual members of the species or their collective leadership, but with the relationship networks that held their civilization together. What they discovered was that even the most competitive species had cooperative relationships at some level, parent to child, mentor to student, creator to creation. By strengthening these natural cooperative bonds and showing how they could expand without threatening the species' essential competitive nature, the Nexus approach offered a path forward that neither transformation nor extinction. The species not only survived but thrived, developing a unique civilization that balanced fierce individual competition with deep cooperative networks. They became the first of what Elena's generation called the Nexus cultures, civilizations that had learned to exist in the creative tension between cooperation and competition, unity and diversity, individual identity and collective purpose. Years passed. Elena, now in her 30s, led the Nexus Institute, a joint human-Verdant multiple species organization dedicated to studying and sharing the principles of universal cooperation. Sarah, well into her 90s but kept vital by the integrated medical technologies of the cooperative colonies, served as an advisor and living link to the early days of contact. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked one evening as they sat in Sarah's garden, now enhanced with plant species from 17 different worlds, all thriving together in impossible harmony. "Regret what?" "Not knowing. In the beginning, you couldn't know if the risk would pay off. You couldn't know if humanity would survive, or if the price of survival would be worth paying." Sarah considered the question seriously. Around them, the garden sang with the subtle harmonies of the verdant energy fields, while human laughter drifted from a nearby community center where children from 6 different species played together. "No," she said finally. "The unknown is where all the best possibilities live. If we'd known for certain what the outcome would be, we never would have found the courage to discover what we were truly capable of." Elena smiled, her hybrid senses picking up the approach of a transport carrying representatives from 3 newly contacted species, all coming to learn about the Nexus approach to cooperation. "Then I guess it's a good thing the universe keeps giving us new unknowns to explore." Sarah looked up at the stars, where the lights of thousands of cooperative colonies twinkled like a promise of infinite possibility. The Verdants had set foot on Earth 34 years ago, never intending to leave. But what they found instead was something better than staying or leaving. They found a way to become part of something larger than either species could achieve alone. Humanity had not only survived first contact, they'd transformed it into an ongoing conversation with the cosmos itself. And the conversation, Sarah realized with deep satisfaction, was just beginning. In the end, the greatest discovery wasn't that humans could evolve without losing their souls, or that cooperation was possible between vastly different species. It was that the universe itself was fundamentally cooperative, and intelligence in all its myriad forms was just the cosmos learning to understand itself through relationship. They had set foot on Earth, planning never to leave again. Instead, they discovered that home was not a place but a way of being together. And together, they were ready for whatever came next.